So uncertainty's been pretty much the only certainty this year, but it is with great joy that I can say with certainty we've arrived at the first Sunday of Advent. Today marks the beginning of a new liturgical year, and we begin our journey through the Gospel of Mark. There's so much in our reading today. As always, it's connected to the whole and set within a particular context. The whole of chapter 13 forms the last major block of instructional material. In just the very next chapter in Mark, Jesus will head to Gethsemane with the disciples, where he will pray, and then he'll be arrested and betrayed. Our reading today is part of Mark's little apocalypse. Apocalypse meaning revelation. And it's part of Jesus' eschatological discourse. Eschatological, basically looking at the end times. It's understood that when the Gospel of Mark was written, that there was great upheaval. One of the worst in Jewish history. This was a community struggling in the historical moment of war during the Roman invasion of 68 to 70 CE. It was a time of great suffering. Poverty was increasing, violence was prolific, and people lived with pain, loss, and trauma. The guts of Israel's traditions had been ripped out. Apocalyptic literature raises its head throughout the ages, and generally it's when people feel that they've got little chance of fighting back against the powerful, or of gaining political, military, or economic power. And hence, the apocalyptic literature has sometimes been referred to as literature of the oppressed or dispossessed. The first part of the reading this morning presents us with calamitous cosmic events. The sun being darkened, the moon giving no more light, stars falling, powers of heaven being shaken. Imagery of the world being returned to its primordial state of darkness and chaos. While perhaps the imagery is far beyond our comprehension, and quite often avoided, generally because this is the sort of literature that's been used and abused to manipulate people and create fear, which isn't the purpose. We've got to engage with it. The language and imagery is evocative and poetic. It's like that of the oracles of judgment spoken by the prophets in the Hebrew scriptures. In the ancient world, stars were actually understood as powers in their own right and considered as conscious beings. So in this context, what we're being presented with is the suggestion that the highest structures of power will fall. And once the powers have fallen, we've got the advent of the Son of Man coming in the clouds and the vindication of the elect. This imagery is echoing back to the book of Daniel, with a human-like one coming in glory, one given dominion and kingship, the dominion and everlasting dominion, never to be destroyed. In Daniel, the understanding is that this human one will be served by all peoples, whereas Mark turns this reverence upside down, having already declared the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And this reference to the Son of Man coming in the clouds is a pivotal text in a very important theme of Mark's Christology. We then encounter the lesson of the fig tree. Now within this first verse we encounter the phrase "mathete ten parabolan," which is learn the parable. And this is the only appearance of the verb mantherion, from which the word mathete, or as we know it, disciple, derives. Anywho, I had to get my bit of Greek in there to show that I've looked at my Greek New Testament. Earlier in Mark, we'll find Jesus cursing the fig tree and then sharing a lesson from the withered fig tree. And in between those two, Jesus cleanses the temple. The cursing of the fig tree was the first hint that Jesus intended to repudiate the temple state, and a decision that seems to be made clear in the temple action that followed that. The lesson to learn then in today's summary of these seems to be that the world of the temple, which represents a particular social order, must come to an end. For this will then make way for a new social order to dawn, because the summer is near. The call to learn concludes with assurance, urging that people are to have total confidence in God's plan. The final section concludes with the need for constant vigilance as the plan unfolds and reaches its climax. Jesus highlights that no one knows the time, only the Father. In this account, slaves are given authority, and each is given a task. And the most important, it seems, is identified with the command to the doorkeeper, who must be watchful. As it continues, there's no escape from the references to the trial and passion account. And ironically, once at Gethsemane, Jesus asks the disciples to stay awake as he leaves in a state of distress to pray. On his return, he finds them sleeping. There's a lot to take in, and like I said, that is actually a huge passage. And perhaps it might even seem a bit strange to have a pre-crucifixion reading at the beginning of Advent, before the Christmas celebrations. But this is also a time of waiting and anticipation of the parousia, the second coming of the human one. And so the apocalyptic moment of the cross is significant. This generation even, will not pass away until. This is what Gandhi refers to as Satya Gara, the force of truth revealed. The moment of the cross is the breaking of the dominant order, the temple state dismantled, and the powers overthrown. For many people this year, as we've watched the darkness of a pandemic descend upon the world, it's been a year of suffering and pain. Uncertainty has become the norm. So much has happened. The Black Lives Matter movement rose up at the injustices experienced by the black communities. Its mantra was "Stay woke," a call for people to pay attention to what was happening. The Zimbabwean musician and human rights activist Oliver Tukudzi, he died earlier this year, wrote a song, "Wake Up." And in fact, all of his music was a challenge to acknowledge the social and economic issues that govern people's daily lives. His song, "Wake Up," was a call to action to see and address issues such as political unrest, rising HIV rates, and widespread poverty. This apocalyptic reading this morning is an invitation. It offers us hope that the whole of creation can be renewed and transformed. The graphic imagery reminds us that God is infinitely more powerful than all other powers. the falling of the stars is the falling of powers. It's a reminder that the cross is not defeat, but the advent of the human one toppling the powers, and the cross stands at the centre of our faith. As we begin the journey through Advent towards Christmas, we need to remember that more than 2,000 years ago, the dawn of a new world began. With the first of the birth pangs, Mary carried in her womb a life that brought justice, peace, and love into the world in ways that turned the world upside down. This tiny human one would force the truth to be revealed, and that truth was that there is another way. God's plan continues to unfold, and as disciples, we're called to stay awake. We're called into action, to continue the work of God's plan and to see that the world is pregnant with possibilities. The call to stay awake is a call to action, a call to welcome the inbreaking of God's kingdom in a world that's broken, in a world where people feel disenfranchised, to see the people on the margins of our community, and rather than being filled with discouragement, to be moved by compassion. It's a call to ensure that all people are accepted, received, and valued as God accepts, receives, and values. It's a call to create new and inclusive communities. It's a call to ensure that light shines on injustice. It's a call to live the Jesus way, a way that offers hope, a way that welcomes, and a way of love. Let's pray. God of Advent, we give thanks that you continue to call us, and for the hope that is offered through Jesus the Christ. Send your Spirit upon us. May she visit us afresh this day, whispering to each of us, stay awake, the kingdom is near. Reminding us of the possibilities and opportunities that lay before us to be a renewed and inclusive community. Amen.